Gonaïves specifically in 2012. Nadine had earned a BA in history from Yale College and a master's in education from the in international education policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's been named among the top global social innovators by Echoing Green, made the Forbes magazine's 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs list, and received an inaugural Obama Foundation Fellowship for her work leading ACE pour Haiti. So Nadine, thank you so much for all of this and for joining us. Our third panelist for today is Dr. Yveline Alexis. Yveline, as she likes to be called, is an associate professor of Africana Studies and Comparative American Studies at Oberlin College and Observatory. Her training includes degrees in history and Africana Studies from Cornell. Her PhD she earned in history as well, Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies specifically from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she also earned her master's. Among Yveline's special interests are memory studies and the oral history of silence and ignored minority groups. Her work on the different ways that Haitians responded to US imperialism really looks at how Haitian women and men also protested in intellectual, artistic, and religious ways during that occupation. She's the author of the book that came out of that work, Haiti Fights Back, The Life and Legacy of Charlemagne Péralte. So it's on Amazon, get it, it's sure to be a good one. Our fourth panelist is Garry Pierre-Pierre, whom many of you know as the founder of the Haitian Times. Garry is a Pulitzer Prize winning multimedia and entrepreneurial journalist. In 1999, he left the New York Times to launch the Haitian Times in Brooklyn. That's where I first met him in 2002. And the weekly publication served the Haitian diaspora since then. It's been going, from print to online. And here we are still able to bring you this conversation today. Garry is the co-founder of the City University Graduate School of Journalism Center for Community and Ethnic Media and a senior producer at CUNY TV. He also teaches journalism, of course. And in terms of degrees, he's got a bachelor's degree in economics from FAMU. So go Rattlers. You might see Garry a lot on Twitter. And if you don't already, please be sure to catch his weekly column, which publishes on every Friday on HaitianTimes.com. And last but not least is the lyricist, singer, musician, producer, poet, songwriter, Wyclef Jean. Wyclef's music, Wyclef has written, performed, and produced both as a solo superstar and as founder and guiding member of the Fugees, as we all know, right? He's consistently been a powerful pop cultural force for over 2 decades. In 1996, the Fugees released a monumental album, The Score, and the album, created in Wyclef's studio in his uncle's basement in New Jersey, hit #1 on the Billboard charts, spawning a trio of smash singles. And now he's a solo artist whose work draws from innovative, eclectic palette of pop, country, folk, disco, Latin, and electronic music. We know that Wyclef is special not only because he's a certified 6 times platinum winner, but for many of us who are Haitian American, what makes him such a superstar to us is showing up on the Grammy stage with that Haitian flag on his back and making us all just really erupt in joy when we saw that. With all that said, I'm gonna jump into a conversation with our very first question. And so I think we'll ask Wyclef first, like, how have you experienced unity or disunity in the community from all of your travels, the music you've written, and just interactions with people in Haiti and in the US?
Well, I want to thank y'all, first of all, for giving me this platform. It's incredible. Garry Pierre-Pierre, we've had the most successful debates on WhatsApp of constantly exchanging policies back and forth. And we said, man, why can't all Haitians just get along like this in conversation? So I really want to start by saying that You mentioned the idea of the Grammys within the Haitian flag structure. One of the things when I came within these United States of America and I was in high school, in teaching me Black history, one of the things that I had a problem with was the idea of how would you teach me Black history without including our history in it. So what I meant by that was the idea of the contribution of the Haitians to America, whether we're talking about the Louisiana Purchase or we're talking about the founder of Chicago, or if we're talking about the idea of one of the places when it came to trade and the idea of export, um, and who laid a groundwork of how the rest of the country should operate, right? So for me, I found that mind-boggling that they never mentioned that. So the reason why one of the things I wanted to be was a rapper. The reason I wanted to be a rapper, and you know, my father, who's a minister, a Nazarene minister of Nazarene faith, you know, I always tell, if my uncle Raymond Joseph was here, he would tell y'all the story. But when I went to my dad, he was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I'm going to be a rapper. He was like, rapper, drug dealer, music. I don't ever want to hear this kind of stuff in the church. So um, it was hard to explain to my father that there was a part of the word rap, which meant poetry, right? Langston used the idea of being able to communicate within a generation. So what I did was I said, if I can become one of the best rappers in America, if I could learn their language, if I can convey this message, then I would be able to convey the message of 1804. So when you see me with the flag on my back at the Grammys, it is something ever since a kid, when I was coming up. My father looked at me and he said, tell me one Haitian musician that you know who's not on drug, who's everybody know around the world and is the most famous. I said, Wyclef Jean. And I was 17. And the reason I said that to him was I wore that flag because I wanted every Haitian around the entire world. They used to call us Haitian body odor. You know, they had all kind of, I had cousins that got killed in front of Erasmus. I got family members that are deported. I got some that are serving time in prison right now. All because the idea of this flag and the idea of coming to America within this immigrant story, I wanted to convey a message of positivity. So when we say l'union fait la force, it takes two parts. The diaspora within these United States of America have the power. And what I mean by you have the power, you have the economical power, you have the intellectual power. So in order for Haiti to change, and so the idea of Haiti really changing, we would have to apply the l'union fait la force here. Because if we don't have the unity here, then it would be totally impossible to change what's back home. So on stage, these are the messages that I try to convey through my music, like Bob Marley, in a very cryptic way. And, you know, I still want it to be fly. I still want y'all to dance and have a good time. But this is the backbone of what I try to convey around the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you, Wyclef. And we'll come back to you in a little bit to dig into what that unity can look and feel like for us in the diaspora, right? But let's go around the room a little bit and get some thoughts from Garry and Nadine, because Nadine, I think you've said in the past that there could be unity with conflict. And I think Wyclef touched on that a little bit when he said the WhatsApp conversations, you know, have been so interesting where I assume that everyone is agreeing with each other. So maybe Nadine, talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go to Garry for some thoughts.
Honneur.
J'espère.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you all so much for the invitation to join me. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, so I think this topic is so important and so timely based on what you shared, because one of the things that we have done as educators, I can speak from my approach as an educator, is that sometimes we don't define our terms, right? I think we throw around a lot of terms that are so important to us, whether it is freedom, whether it is equity, whether it is unity. And one of the things that I would like to share with you all is I think something when we use the word unity, because one of the things that we do as part of the Haiti movement is really try to reclaim our power and re-identify the assets that exist within our culture and within our history. Because unity is in our DNA, right? Whether it's the slogan on the flag or the proverbs such as there is so much that's deeply embedded within the DNA of, I think the concern I would have as we try to define it and use it and try to figure out where it exists is that sometimes we have a very imported definition of what unity is. Imported meaning not Haitian, where we're trying to live up to a standard that maybe not contextualized to what we hold dear as a culture. Or we might purely look at it from a political lens. Are we all affiliated towards the same political objectives? If not, why not? And we try to go down the rabbit hole of the political definition of unity. And so what I would posit actually is that if we were to Haitians, whether it's sol, whether it's kombit, whether it's the ways in which one other gives each other wulib, there's unity everywhere. And I would just posit that we should try to lift up the everyday examples of unity. And then the flip side of that is be very wary about the single story narrative. I would encourage everyone to look at the TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's an incredible Nigerian author, who wrote about and spoke about the danger of a single story. And I'm concerned sometimes that we have one narrative about how unity exists among Haitians, when I think it's actually quite nuanced. And so to your earlier point, Mac, I think it's okay if there is conflict within unity, because there's a lot of great research that has been showing us that there is high conflict that is destructive, and then there's productive conflict where we actually hash out differences and nuance until we get to a point where we have a shared objective. And sometimes that actually, with good conflict, is more productive and more sustainable.
We're gonna have to find that TED Talk and put it in the chat for everyone to check out. Thanks so much. That was excellent. Garry, share your thoughts on what Najin has said, right? And maybe your own experiences with how you've seen, right, or illustrated, demonstrated unity in the community.
Well, I agree with Najin's point very substantively, but I think if I go back to the to the late 70s in New York, when we all knew each other literally because we all came from the same Bel Air, Pétionville, or Port-au-Prince neighborhoods. That was it. It was sort of like a small expatriate group. And the community grew out of that. As it was growing, we had soccer leagues, a Haitian soccer league, and our bals and our parties were really a family affair. We were close knit. So of course, naturally, as we grew larger as a community and we began migrating from the Upper West Side to Flatbush, and then to New Jersey and the suburbs and beyond, now all over the country. What has happened, I think, we haven't, in a meteoric rise in American society, and I think that's something we have to talk about. I think a movement was too fast in some ways, our success was too fast because we really didn't develop those roots in Brooklyn or in Newark, the first places where we came in. So we were fast, we wanted to get out of these places fast, which was great. But then we never really developed that sort of like strong roots and identity in these communities. And so as we are moving broader, we also had at that time a common enemy, if you will. We all agreed that Duvalier had to go. It was a dictator. That's why a lot of us came over here, escaping that situation. So we rallied around that. After he left, I think we struggled mightily to find that commonality. And this is where we are at this moment. This is why it's so very critical right now that we find that, we identify it, whether it's that conflict that we need to unite around or the flag, which seems to be the one thing that unites us. I was looking at social media today. I mean, I was feeling so proud. I mean, all of these Flag Day celebration and all of that. This is really great. So perhaps the answer is looking at us in the face. And, you know, it's about the flag. That's what we all, no matter what skin complexion, what background, Haitian, from the provinces, from the city, from the, you know, poor areas, wherever we're from, we navigate towards the flag. It's a magnet that we all rally around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we move forward, we need to find out ways to do that. How can we do that? And what is that gonna take? What form is that gonna take? But I think it's crucial, like Wyclef said, you know, watching the country go through some stuff right now. And it's like it seems like there's no way out, but we got to find a solution, and it has to be a Haitian solution,
mm-hmm.
because it's our country. You know, we just happen to live outside of it. You know, so we have to first unite ourselves here, come to a common place, and then try to see how we can better help Haiti. I would rather invest in Haiti instead of sending money to Haiti. It's where we are right now. I think the crux of it is just like everyone realizes there is a problem. Now the question is, how do we solve it?
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Alexis, Yveline, let's go to you for some historical perspectives, right? Because we've heard these three experiences that Wyclef, Nadine, and Garry shared. What can you add from a historical standpoint around the definitions of unity, or where we are now in terms of being unified as a people?
Yeah, merci en pile. I really appreciate the Haitian Times invitation, and for all of us just for tuning into, you know, an important moment. It's Haitian Heritage Month, and Bleu et Rouge is just so important that we're here. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation. And I think it's interesting to think about, right? So I argue that our desire and our actions to be seen as Haitians, to be seen as human beings, as citizens, and as free, whether the nation or as individual, really fuel these unifying moments. And I'm of the argument that we are unified, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at the past, when we look at our ancestors, whether it's François Macondel, Cécile Fatima, Sanité Belair, or Jean-Jacques Dessalines, these women and men and people were fighting for those core rights specifically. And what I find interesting is that when we fast forward past the revolution and look at different moments in Haiti's past, it's a similar quest as well as a similar battle, right? So for example, when I look at Charlemagne Pérat avec the Cacos and in their own fight, looking at this period that I just wrote about in my book, Haiti Fights Back, I examine how the US military invaded Haiti from 1915 to 1934. And what became so beautiful and really necessary to document was how Haitian unity was one of our most effective tools against US imperialism, right? So during that period, and just others too, this is not just a revolutionary moment or this invasion period, and continuing through the Duvalier, but beyond and currently, what you find is étrangers, these foreigners, they're saying that Haitians are not unified. Typically, they're saying that they're not political, that we're bandits, and just a slew of just violent, racist, and sexist epithets. And I agree with this point that we need to push back against these narratives and stand in just like the historical past and the historical legacy that shows over and over how unified we are. So what I found interesting about that period from 1915 to 1934, but again, across all moments of Haiti's past, is that while they're saying that these people are apolitical and there's, shedding like derogatory images of them as bandits, right, as people that are not unified, you find people like Charlemagne Pérat and so many Haitian women that I found in the archives who are precisely unified over this sentiment that Haiti is ours. Like we inherited Haiti from Dessalines, from Fatima, and therefore we're gonna wage this struggle against the US military, against colonialism and imperialism to defend our nation, but also we will fight for the right for Haitien avec Haitien, right? All of us to be treated as legitimate and free beings. And I think us upholding this idea that historical memory that they fought for us, and it's our duty to keep on fighting, and we see these moments throughout our past of of us doing this. And then, thinking about your point, Garry, this spills over into Brooklyn, New York, right? Thinking about Abner Louima and all of these instances of how Haitians have unified and stand firm in that historical past, specifically to say, nous là, nous unifiés. That's what I'll add.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow, that was excellent. And we can't forget Catherine Flon, right? Someone in the chat mentioned her. C'est lui-même qui coud drapeau pour nous. So, chapeau bas pour Catherine Flon. Dave, let me bring you in here to add your perspective on this. How do you see either unity or a lack of it in your work with Basketball to Uplift Youth in Matissan?
Well, thank you, Mac. Well, I want to say that as Najin mentioned, unity is in our DNA, right? We could have accomplished what we did in 1803, which eventually led us to declare our independence on January 1st, 1804, if we weren't unified as a people. And immediately after independence, through as the country developed, really, we were an agricultural economy, and as a people, we really relied on the notion of combit, of coming together to produce together and feed each other, right? But I think one of the challenges that we face to this unity has been the demographic shift we've experienced in Haiti since the time of independence to recent times, right? As recent as 1960, we had 16% of Haitians living in rural areas, right? And right now in 2021, it's nearly 60% of Haitians living in urban areas. And so what's happened with this demographic shift is you have a large concentration of folks living in cities such as Port-au-Prince or Cap-Haïtien or Gonaïves, and you don't have the structures in place really to allow these people to live decently, right? And it's led to scarcity. And as an organization, Basketball pour la Jeunesse, we work in some of the tougher urban neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince, namely Matissan and Cité Soleil. And these neighborhoods have partly been created due to this demographic shift that you've seen happening from the rural areas to the urban areas. And with folks living in such scarcity, it's sort of led them to be disconnected from our roots as a people, and led to, the high crimes and the prevalence of gangs that we experience in these areas. And, sadly, because of the fact that, these folks had to leave, rural areas to live in abject conditions in Port-au-Prince, that it's impacted our unity as a people. But still, I'm still amazed to see, despite the challenges, how folks in these communities facing the challenges that they face, how they come together to support one another, regardless of the challenging conditions that they live in.
Dave, I'm glad you mentioned, this migration from the provinces, the countryside, into this urban setting, because I think that reminds me of like a parallel migration we saw to Florida, right? To Miami. Like while Garry was talking about the 70s and Haitians being in New York and the Northeast, a parallel migration was taking place maybe a few years later, right? In Florida. And these are people, when I think about us in the US, a lot of folks in Florida you wouldn't have met from other parts, because they're from other parts of Haiti, or you're from New York, we just wouldn't have met. So in a way, we're all coming together like for the first time and trying to figure out like, qui langue nous parle, right? Because we can be from the same country, the same place, but our understanding, even our language, and we just did a story about this earlier this week, we use different words to mean the same things. So I just wanted to add that real quick. And if anyone has thoughts on that piece, please share. But moving on to the next question, I think is really important, right? So Wyclef said, as the diaspora, we have the intellectual, economic power. Garry, likewise, you said it's got to be a Haitian solution if we want to help Haiti, right? And Najin, you already said, like, we are united, same thing. So how does that then, right? What does that unity look like in the diaspora? I'll go back to Wyclef for this one, if you have a specific vision of what it could look and feel like, or if you've seen it.
Thank you so much. The first thing that I said, this is great, conflict with debate, this makes sense, right? Because we have democratic power to talk as we want. You know, we don't have to worry about being assassinated like Jean-Dominique. And each of us have opinions and we have factual information. And at the same time, we're not just throwing rhetoric on the radio. So a lot of time what happens is the message gets fabricated because it's just intense, too much static that's going on. You know what I mean? So I definitely just wanted to state that. Sorry, I rambled on that. Can you re-ask me a question? I wanted to get to
So
that.
in terms of like your vision, right?
Okay, yes, I got it.
Intellectual
100%.
economic piece.
Yeah, I just wanted to tap that. So the first thing is, I always say you got to break it down to the reality, right? The reality is that Washington, D.C., the eagle, right, as you call it, policy change, like this is the reality. So if anything you wanted to change to the core, you have to state the elephant in the room, right? You also have to state the fact of the IMF and the World Bank, right? You have to, come on, like think about this, right? If I have a mansion and I put you in it and I'm saying, okay, now every month you got to pay me $100,000 and you barely making $2, right? This is the reality of what's going on in the ground. The people are literally trapped through this process, right? And the only way that they're gonna get out of this, right, it's gonna take more of us, right? In the position of understanding, becoming councilmen, councilwomen, right? Understanding, becoming more lawyers, more judges, understanding how we can go to Washington, not just in talking and rhetoric, but to actually help implement, you know, policies that can really help our country. Because if we are within the diaspora and we're going to make a change, you have to go right to the core of the problem. And the core of the problem is policy change, right? And implementing anti-corruption laws, right? And at the end of the day, someone has to reinforce that. The other part of it is economical freedom. If you don't get to economical freedom, you don't have anything. Who can do that but us up here? So, and think about how much money you sent through the remittance, right? And the remittance every year is over $2 billion, right? So how can you be of such power here, but have absolutely no say in any form of real electoral process within the people that you actually want to save, you know? So for me, these are some of the debates that I talk about, and I feel that my brother's a lawyer, you know, in America, and I just feel that, you know, we need to have a stronger influence in Washington in the sense of not the fabrication, but the idea of really moving forward. The second part I would say is private sector. You know, it's very important, right, that we understand as business people, you know, we want to be in situations where we would not like to take the investment to the Bahamas, right? We would not like to take it to Jamaica, right? But we are forced to because it's nothing is set up towards our favor in actuality. So for me, these are some of the struggles that I struggle with, and I scream with a loud voice, and I feel that, and I keep going back to, you know, we have the economical power here, we have the intellectual power. And I think that what I'm looking for, and what a lot of my friends is looking for, whether if it's Naomi Osaka, and I could keep going, is we're looking for the group to tell us, okay, you know, you guys have the finance, and you know, these are the policymakers, these are the private sectors, and if we all partner up as a group, these are the solutions that we could come up with. So these are the things that I'm still looking for as Wyclef, you know.
Yeah, that's a lot. Let me ask if they've seen any models that could work just from their work on the ground of either diaspora or Haiti partnerships that are working that we just don't know about, but may be scalable.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that question because we know the problem, and let's kind of figure out what the solution and the asset-based approach will be to sustainable change. I would want to point out maybe 3 things I've noticed that really drives really high impact efforts. And that's how YT's focus on decolonizing equity and liberation. That is Dave's excellent work that's happening, not just Matissan, Cité Soleil and other places and others. I have 3 trends. One, tell their own story, right? Back to the question about new views, have a little savor, want to unite people and bring them together quickly. We jump and skip the steps of allowing people to tell their own story and a Creole in a way that truly represents their desires, their beliefs, and how they can contribute themselves. And I'll say why we believe those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. I sometimes give the example of the woman who sells bananas in the marketplace. She can have an economic, may not be the way you want to define the credential, but she knows the ins and outs of the economy. She knows what to sell, how to sell, who to sell to. And I think we really need to value that, because that in itself is an asset. The second trend of really high impact and really drives real change is when you not only talk, and I appreciate for this, a lot of rhetoric, we love to debate, we love time skips the step of the action oriented. And I think that's what's so powerful about Convite, because Convite is actually bringing people together to do something, whether you're on the field and everybody has a job, whether it's the way they put money together to make sure this happened, whether it's our teacher leaders planning a lesson together, whether it is multiple people putting together for a sol, like those are very concrete ways that Convite is not just a word or a concept, but it is action oriented, and it helps people see what is possible when we come together towards a shared objective. That was the second point. And then the third point quickly that I wanted to share that I noticed as a really powerful trend is when we value sweat equity and emotional labor. Because of the definitions of what brings unity, let's make sure we don't narrowly define it as a vote or as employment. That's important, of course, dignified labor and salaries. But what about all the community well-being by putting into it, right? We have a ton of moms who may not be able to pay their children's tuition every day, but they're going to show up and help do lunch. They're going to help with the canteen every noon, right? That is emotional labor of those who are bringing awareness to issues such as the fact that we can really revalue naturally grown fruits and vegetables rather than importing everything and trying to think that chips are better than that is emotional labor, and that is all of the things that, in my opinion, movements that are here local.
Okay. I think we're losing Nadine, but in case anyone had trouble hearing her, she made 3 key points about making sure that we decolonize the mind and tell our own stories en Creole, right? Understanding that things like Convite is an example of what we do every day consistently anyway, that shows we're unified in our unity mindset. And then third, she was saying we have to value sweat equity and emotional labor. So the contributions may not always be, oh, I think she's back. But I was just summarizing in case folks had trouble hearing because we had connectivity issues. So Dave, let me ask you real quick from what, because you and Nadine, you guys work and do similar work, right? And you work together at times. Like, is there a way then for, how could we reconcile what's happening on the ground with Haiti with what the diaspora may be doing or what we're experiencing stateside?
Yeah, I think what we need is a conspiracy of goodwill, right? If we know we're all in favor of the country moving forward, we need to find ways to support each other. And, when Nadine moved to Haiti in 2012, that was the same year I moved back, I launched Basketball Ponca de la Jeunesse a year later. And it was at that time that she started working on launching Unsafe Haiti. And I helped with the recruitment of the first cohort of teacher leaders. So we began collaborating. And although Unsafe Haiti had a focus on rural areas and Latibonite and Plateau Central, and my organization focused on disadvantaged urban neighborhoods, we still try to find a way to collaborate. And the way that we did that was to have some of the teachers who go through her program go and serve as tutors for our kids on Saturdays and multi-science day soleil. And we started this in 2017, and 4 years later, still going strong with that. So I think that's, we could find a lot of different synergies for us to collaborate. It doesn't have to be 2 organizations on the ground like we are. It could be an organization in the diaspora and the one in Haiti, for example. And another thing too, I think, in terms of Haitians living in Haiti, sometimes it feels like you have multiple countries within one country. You have people living in drastically different ways depending on where they live. There's an American school in Delma 95 called Bridge Academy that invited me to speak to its students a couple of weeks ago. And when I told the students that I work in Cité-Soleil and Matissan, they were just shocked. And I told them that the kids in Cité-Soleil and Matissan are just like you. They look just like you, and they didn't believe me. So I talked to the athletic director who had invited me, and I told him, I think we should organize a friendly basketball game between our kids from Cité-Soleil and Matissan and the kids at Bridge Academy. And this past Friday, we actually had the game. We got the kids, we had a team composed of youth from both Cité-Soleil and Matissan on our organization's team, and they played against the kids at Bridge Academy. We beat them, but that wasn't the biggest part of it. The whole experience was truly amazing to me because we just came with our kids, right? And we're playing on their home court. But the amazing thing was because they knew we had no fan support, whenever one of our players would score a nice basket, they would cheer us on too, right? And after the game finished, even though they lost, they still took the time to, interact with our youth, played volleyball with them on the court and played soccer with them and, exchanged numbers and became friends. And, it really showed me that, as Haitians, if we take the time to talk to each other and get to learn one another, whether you're from Cité-Soleil and Matissan or you're, the child of the top 1%, as these kids are, we still could get along and learning from each other and be friends and work towards a better Haiti.
I love that. Conspiracy of goodwill and breaking down barriers, right? So people can get to know each other. Yeah, yes. Those initial conversations can go a long way. Garry, you mentioned the Haitian solution, right? We talked a little bit about what the diaspora can do in terms of economically, politically, right? Doing what we need to do here. And you've spoken, Dave and Nadine, about the work on the ground that you're doing. And I love this reverse brain drain too, where you're taking back all of your training and education in the US and applying it in Haiti. So now, Garry, you had some things to say about the commission that was formed this past week to find a Haitian solution to the political problem, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about your views on that as a bridge between these two points we've just made around the US side, the on the ground side, right? What does that Haitian solution look like in your mind?
Well, I think, first of all, I feel that right now we're at an impasse in the community. We have to basically decide what we want to be as a community. I don't think we are having that conversation. Once we have that conversation and we come to a consensus, then we can engage with folks in Haiti. The group that was formed recently to find a Haitian solution, I applaud the idea, but I'm a bit skeptical about the players who are in it, because those are the same people who kind of were the architect of the ultimately 2004 coup d'etat against Aristide, which left me sort of feeling bothered ever since, because that year we were celebrating our 200th anniversary of independence. And this is when these guys decided that Aristide had to go. Because they failed to understand what an opposition party operates like. And they just operated like the good bad old days of yesteryears, where you can use the army to overthrow a president that you didn't like. So I think that group I'm a bit leery of, but the idea, yes, absolutely. But I think it should be brought in. People like Dave should be part of any conversation, because he's really, like you said, reverse brain drain, going back, and he understands both worlds. And he has an intimate knowledge of Haiti now that many of us here don't have. And so I think that's what I'm talking about, finding, suitable partners, not just because the person is Haitian, is a partner. Yes, obviously, that person has a role to play, but in the leadership role, you need to like-minded person, not people believing in the same exact thing or not having differences of opinion. No, I'm not saying that, but people who you're on the same page, you understand, you're talking the same language, and have the capacity and the ability to scale it up, because Wyclef threw something out there and we haven't taken up on it, that okay, people like him, Naomi Osaka, a lot of the football players, they really want to engage, but we're not giving them structures, systems to engage. Right now, it's a lot of individual efforts, but we have to scale those efforts. We in the community have to come together and like invest, not only money but time and knowledge to really come together and then move forward towards Haiti, because our needs here are not as fundamental as they are in Haiti. And so it starts, I don't know if it starts here, but we have to an important role to play. And the sooner we realize that, I think the sooner we can get going.
Yeah, those are some excellent points. So tell me then, like, let's dig into what you brought up, right? People who are ready and willing to contribute. What could that structure look like ideally? What would it take? Is it trust and transparency? Like, what would it take, Wyclef, for you to say, okay, I'm on board, let's do this, I'm going to support this particular, initiative that's happening to better the country, just so we have a pretty good idea.
Yeah, thank you again. Great question. And I speak in behalf of all my friends, and they all respect me because they watch me go through the fire. So I speak firsthand. So I don't speak as someone who's theoretically speaking. I'm speaking as someone who has been bullied many times. You know what I mean? So in understanding that, it only makes me stronger. What the first part of it is, when we talk about that, is as far as a group that has a fund, right? And we're not talking charity, because we just believe that charity is a sense of a Band-Aid, from my experience, right? So we talk about economic freedom. I will never talk about nothing else from the time that I live, right? The idea of, creating entrepreneurs, right? So we want to engage with a team that we feel has an understanding of how policy operates and has a hand on what's going on in Washington, and has a hand on operating in the idea of a bipartisan front on what's great for the Haitian people, not what's great for them. That's really, we have a hard time finding that. We find that with Haiti, with the groups that we speak to, it's either they way or the highway. And we feel that bipartisan is very important, because it's not really about us, it's about the people. And the second thing is, to the idea of trust basically means that just the idea of transparency, right? And we more want to approach it in the sense of business. We do not want to approach it in social entrepreneurship. So in seeing, like, my brothers and sisters and me listening already with just on this Zoom, I'm already inspired to hear about more of what's going on in Go Naive, more about my brother that just won the game in the NBA, right? So you see this little conversation here, what that did was it opened my eyes to a new form of, I can go back after this Zoom and talk to my people back. There was a few people, we should look into these organizations, because what I heard here was not charity. It was in the sense of inspiration and in the sense of giving Haitian people a better life, right? Parce que moi, m'kote m'soti la sen. Kote m'soti, c'est pas un kote m'supposé rive aux États-Unis, no? Parce que statistically, where I'm from, it's that simple idea of me having that chance, right? My parents taking that risk and getting that chance that allows me to get to New York to get that chance. And the idea of anybody who risks their lives to go back to that country, right, with the understanding and the knowledge from here and take that back home, that sacrifice allows us to just want to support that, because we understand what that's like, because we're in America. and they're actually on the ground doing the work. So we look for not just the idea of the word. So if I could sum it down in 2 words, it would be understanding how policy works in DC, how trade works. That's one side of it. And then the other side of it is understanding how economical freedom works. And we do not want to be a Band-Aid. We want to be business partners and work with people in forming social entrepreneurship.
I love that. We're going to have to just have the list in the post-Zoom email we send of different organizations that we know about who are doing some of the work Nadine and Dave are doing. That was a very clear explanation of what you're looking for, Wyclef. Thanks so much. Anyone else would like to add to that before I ask the next question? In terms of a vision they might have that would get them to jump on board and say, okay, I'm ready to engage either in Haiti or in the US.
Yeah, just to add to the conversations, and I'm really happy to be hearing some of these sentiments. You know, I always argue that Haiti from France or the United States, you can't study Haiti from repositories in France or experiences in France or experiences or archives in the United States. You have to go down there and partner with these people, listen to them, learn their languages, have their cultural literacies, including us, right? Nous parlons français, some of us, nous parlons Creole, and it's important for us to think about how do we understand the people on their own terms, and really pushing back against this idea that there's a brain drain. There's so many brains in Haiti doing the work on the ground, right? But may not have the resources that, let's say, a Cornell or a Harvard or an Oberlin has, but they're there holding it down and thinking about it. Nadine, I really appreciate that you brought up the entrepreneur who sells the plantains, who sells the bananas, because that's economic power, economic access right there. And we need to learn from her as opposed to us learning, you know, some of what you were saying, Clef, about the theoretical components of this. So thinking about this idea of we can't save Haiti. I'm never in the business of trying to save Haiti. Haiti has proven itself time and time again of being able to stand firm and survive despite some really abusive systems coming our way and our people's way in particular. So thinking again about how can we listen to the people on the ground about their needs, their wants, their desires, and their experiences, communicating to them in that language, whether it's Creole, whether it's French, Kringlish, Spanish, etc., and really collaborating with them, and so that it's not this top-down imposed upon what we hope, because we're not there, some of us, but what is it that they want to see and how can we help, kind of thing. So, you know, again, fitting that whole adage of assembled hands lighten the burden. There are many ways to get there. And then I'll just end on this note too of thinking about during that long freedom struggle, Black freedom struggle, the civil rights organizations, there were 9 different organizations operating at one time. There wasn't just the NAACP or the Black Panther Party. So there are many ways, whether as artists, entrepreneurs, intellectuals, creators of the Haitian Times, that we can get there. So thinking again about how can we all contribute to this while partnering with our people who are on the ground. I can't stress that enough.
Okay, that was great, Yveline. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've got it. We all have to do our part. So with that in mind, on parle Creole parce que moi gen moun k'ap complète sur book là di trop anglais. So on nous parle ensemble avec moun yo, right? Creole parle Creole comprendre qui ça nous ka di, right? Avant nous commencer aller dans quelques questions nous gain là. Qui ça nous ta comme si 10 moun qui Haïti par exemple, si vous avez vidéo ça là qu'on y a, right? Qui j'en pour yo même, right? Parce que c'est une conversation, c'est pas juste diaspora aller en Haïti et puis résoudre tout problème moun yo, mais qui ça haïtien qui en Haïti lui même capable faire, right? Moun qui pas nécessairement gain un pile cob, mais qui gain assez côté le regarder YouTube et puis le voir conversation ça, right? Qui ça nous ka di moun ça, de qui ça même li capable peut-être faire, qui action capable prendre pour aider mouvement unité ça continue pour changer le pays. Hein.
Bon, premièrement, parler sur ça, et Yveline se dit tout à l'heure, je pense que c'est un bon point parce que c'est très important. Il y a une façon que je pense que mon Haïti, ouais, non? Et bon, qui est vrai.
Qui façon lié?
Nous arrogants. Nous avons une réponse pour toute bagaille parce que nous avons aux États-Unis. Donc, effectivement, c'est pas un bon profil lié. Il faut nous être très conscients de ça. on a parlé de interaction avec Haïti. Conversation ça n'a fait là, c'est une conversation qui a fait parallèle entre Haïti et la diaspora. Si on ne parle de diaspora, on parle d'Haïti, mais très important parce que et pour que Haïti lui-même nous comprenne Haïti, parce que si vous voulez organiser un groupe monde, faut comprendre mon nom, faut parler le langage mon nom, parce que Garry te dit nous, l'MT en Afrique, nous travaillons dans Piscor, l'arrivée dans le village ou pas, moi demande ça vous voulez. Pas forcer bagage sur eux parce que si mon nan dit son pidol besoin pas dire son route besoin et pour fâcher parce qu'il pas de machine pour courir sur route là il pas utiliser route là on ne dit pas besoin route son pidol de besoin ou bah route ça c'est route pour lui pas pour eux donc c'est même bagage donc faut make sure que whatever ça n'a pensé dans tête nous comprendre que nous en accord avec communauté côté notre travail là.
Maxime capable de faire un ajout?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, juste 2 points rapidement. Premier point, parce qu'il y a plusieurs personnes là qui mentionnaient que l'importance unité, importance solidarité, elle existe en tant que haïtien. Mais pour apprécier, il faut connaître l'histoire du pays d'Haïti. Il y a un peu de monde qui est content, on a parlé de 1804, nous parlé de 2-3 autres dates importantes, mais il y a un paquet de détails que nous va apprendre. Donc, dans le mouvement, c'est pour Haïti, on a essayé de décoloniser le système éducatif là, mais tout haïtien, tellement d'informations qui sont disponibles sur Internet, dans le livre, etc. Par exemple, il y a une organisation qui est les Fondations Félicité, qui fait un gros travail pour essayer de partager vraie histoire du pays d'Haïti. Donc, moi, c'est ça, c'est un premier point, pour bien comprendre qui ça veut dire, l'union fait la force, mais en pile, chai palou. Et deuxième aspect que nous avons aimé partager avec nous, c'est partager exemple positif. Nous connaissons les médias, j'ai un gros rôle dans la question de solidarité et unité, et parfois ça qui est partagé est négatif, seulement, à 100%, à même 20%. Donc, même si nous connaissons un seul exemple de ça qui fait, qui est positif, dans une section communale, en province, ou bien dans Port-au-Prince, partagez. Ce n'est pas seulement ça qui est négatif qui est partagé, parce qu'il y a un plus bon bagage qui a fait dans le pays d'Haïti.
That's great. Eh bien, si on est en Haïti, comment on peut le partager dans genre de bail ça? Nous connaissons Dave Gain, Daily Real Productions, right? Félicitations pour ça, continuez de faire travail ça. Qui sont encore nous capables de dire moun yo en Haïti qui capable peut-être tendre nous ou bien passer sous vidéo ça? Est-ce que nous avons un message nous t'aimer que vous connaissez pour vous comprendre de diaspora qui pas profil que Garry saute parler? So Garry, you can take that one because you brought it up first of all. Qui gens ou senti, qui sont à passer ba moun en Haïti en même, qui t'a intéressé travailler ensemble avec Diaspora pour faire pays avancer?
Bon, et bah, très simple, c'est une conversation et puis il faut que nous capables qu'on ait limite les deux bords et pour nous aller pour nous arriver à un point commun. Parce que et comme tout à l'heure, c'est une image, on partit de nous vrai. Parce que toujours il y a deux sides dans un coin. So, bagarre c'est que il faut pas montrer seul côté là. Faut qu'on ait une capacité de tendre, de nous c'est bête qui raisonner, nous raisonner, donc nous capable make sure que nous pas prendre un bluff tout parce que gain monde tout qui va paraître belle parole et puis on pas sincère. Donc, il faut reconnaître l'air qu'on est en mauvaise situation pour sortir là-dedans et puis pour on est là pour faire un assessment de situation qui ça parce que songez bien que en Haïti outside de 1% gain le matin on dit est-ce que m'a manger ici on dit qui ça me veut manger. Donc, mais là, on a un problème fondamental là, comme ça. Les rencontres à avoir, qu'on y a les jouer, les manger. Donc, et donc, ou même, pour comprendre le raisonnement ça, et ou même, tout faut aider mon nom et penser à long terme. Parce que c'est un problème que nous ne pas penser à long terme. Donc, c'est un bagage donnant. C'est comme ça, dire au fait, mais nous-mêmes, nous faisons dire là, tout pour moi, zéro pour vous. Mais pas comme ça. Parce que faut tout le monde joindre. Si tout le monde va joindre, dis-le camper là. Parce que nous avons la bagarre même pour me retourner bas. Donc, pas de dire encore et couper là. Donc, je pense que c'est un dialogue. Parce qu'il y a une raison que vous connaissez très bien dans le journal, que nous insistons pour faire un dialogue. Parce que nous voulons que le monde qui est en Haïti comprenne la réalité de nous ici en tout. Vous ne pas comprendre. Parce que yo gen mit pa yo. Et sincèrement, et nous besoin nous-mêmes ici en tout pour nous commencer à faire travail ça. Parce que nous qu'on fait et puis nous camper. Parce que la situation devient très difficile. Mais il faut nous retourner sur la conversation pour nous comprendre, pour comprendre les limitations nous, et pour nous-mêmes comprendre les limitations de l'autre monde. Et pour nous apprendre à venir avec une solution parce que nous avons des ressources que nous sommes capables de taper là-dedans pour nous dire comme ça, ok, moi, mon plan là, ok, qui est sérieux, il y a des gens sérieux à travailler avec, qui Jean Wyclef avec des amis qui ont investi dans le plan ça.
No, that's a good point. And I think you mentioned gen moun ki komanse mais yo pa kapab kontinye pou an rezon ou bien l'autre, right? Wyclef Jean te di, like he's been burned, you know, in different ways in participating. So then how do you keep going? What's to motivate people who are interested? Moun ki fè pati nan konversasyon sa yo nap fè jodi an la. Ki sa nou kapab di yo pou peut-être aider yo travail malgré fatigue yo kapab gen ensemble avec Haiti, problème Haiti ça. Right? Like Haiti. So, Wyclef.
Oui. So, premier bail m'a dit pour toute population qui en Haïti, nous déjà connaît bien. Premier bagage c'est que si que moi pas découragé, non pas qu'à décourager. Ça c'est premier bagage. Si me décourager, sinon ouais moun sous zoom ça depuis non décourager, non tout mettre décourager. So ça veut dire que même si non ouais non boy ici hein, les fini ou kotoyen. Si on va passer, li frappe que non parce que nous gen moun en Haïti, nous gen moun en partie pas gen tout moun gon histoire en Haïti. I mean, 2 semaines de cela, yo assassiné un bon ami. Ça veut dire que c'est un bail que n'a subi ensemble. Mais qui ça qui fait moi pas jamais décourager ou faire un bon point ou dit que quand ou te brûler ou whatever, right? Là que moi lis histoire, si que moi vraiment crois dans histoire moi liant, moi crois dans tout ça l'ouverture. Moi vraiment crois que même là monsieur va mourir, il va mourir, la peut écrire. Le fini ça la peut écrire, c'est ça qui inspire nous aujourd'hui. Moi fait 17 octobre. Pourquoi ça passe 17 octobre? C'est jour Jean-Jacques Dessalines yo coupe papa. Même moun qui ba non indépendance là, même moun non. So li très important pour nous comprendre que si que n'a avancé devant là que n'a dit l'union fait la force là, non pas qu'à séparer non pas qu'à dire OK parce que nous dans diaspora nous même non en Haïti, c'est 2 bagages différents. Si c'était 2 bagages différents pour mettre pas gen Jean 2 milliards de dollars de Western Union t'a jamais rivé. Ça veut dire que nous t'a privé aux États-Unis, non fait pas gen Jean que on moun t'a dit me fin étudier dans Harvard qu'on y a bon retourner la caméra. Moi voulais que nous qui bel espoir ça, les fini non même qui aux États-Unis non pas qu'à peur retourner dans pays. Te gen un bagay qui te dit earlier, puis bonheur que m'a prédit. So moi gen un pile amis qui sorti en Jamaïque. Bon changer les Fujis t'a sorti, gen moun qui pensait Fujis c'était Jamaïque, right? So mais on parti qui comique dans l'histoire ça pour diaspora qui ici. Ou connaît Jamaïque les mal Kingston, bagay que moi ouais qui t'a passé dans Kingston. C'est pas aucune différence dans ça que gen des fois ouais qu'a passé Port-au-Prince. Non, bon clair avec vous. Kingston c'est capitale là tant que Port-au-Prince c'est capitale là. Mais là ouais que on Jamaïque aux États-Unis, ou dit yo, ça passe dans Jamaïque, mais c'est do man, Jamaica nice man. Kingston crazy, but Jamaica nice. So ça veut dire que faut que nous promoter pays, non pas qu'à faire moun peur quand si on problème en Port-au-Prince, on dit qu'il y a un problème en Port-au-Prince, non un problème de l'autre côté, mais pays, il faut que nous montrions que Haïtiens, c'est un peuple qui a l'amour, nous avons l'amour dans le cœur. C'est très important que nous avancions. So, tout Haïtien qui en Haïti qui suivent ça, si que tout ça pas découragé, beaucoup de monde pas découragé, Catherine Flon, the Akaye, passé la papa me sorti, mon Akaye, yo pas découragé, so non même, non pas qu'à décourager, parce que nous fait commencer travail, non. Les fini, papa me toujours dit, moi, bon Dieu, pas jamais ba non yon chat, il pas jamais mettre ton chat sous non, que li connaît, que non pas capable supporter. Mais faut que nous supporter l'ensemble. C'est ça que je voulais dire toute population. Merci.
Well said. Thank you so much. Dave, what would you say? What would you add? And then we'll go to a couple questions before we start wrapping. Yeah, qui entendait que moun yo en Haïti a dit même de qui façon diaspora ou bien communauté internationale là capable vraiment aider Haïti.
Ouais. Bon, ma première c'est Clef en pile pour paroles à que le partager ensemble avec nous. Et songez en 97 le Wyclef rentre en Haïti et c'est là ça que l'album de Carnival a sorti et puis musique est a sorti, etc. Et ça fait 24 ans de ça. Et je l'ai dit en Haïti, majorité haïtienne dans le pays pour qu'on fait le Wyclef rentrer dans le pays en 97. Donc réfléchissez à ça. Plus de 50% de population faite en 1997 ou après.
Wow.
Le pays est extrêmement jeune. OK? Donc nous avons un pile potentialité devant nous. Nous ne pouvons pas quitter comme si nous décourager avec la situation pays parce que nous avons un pile espoir. Nous avons l'avenir devant nous toujours parce que nous sommes un pays qui est extrêmement jeune. Donc, c'est ça que je dis. Et je pense que les gens qui sont dans la diaspora, qui nous-mêmes nous contribuer pour accompagner la jeunesse en Haïti et pour ne pas décourager, pour avoir une opportunité parce que ça, je n'ai besoin vraiment, c'est opportunité. Opportunité pour aller à l'école, opportunité de leur étudier ça, étudier pour rejoindre un travail ou bien pour avoir un moyen pour créer un propre business par eux. OK? Et donc, c'est ça, je pense vraiment pour nous qui jeunes accompagner et jeunes. Et c'est le travail ça qu'on a fait dans le basketball pour regarder la jeunesse et que Nedine a fait dans l'enseignement pour Haïti parce que jeunesse, pas seulement c'est à pays, mais déjà, qui est dans ces présents pays parce qu'il y a en majorité.
Very bien. Well said. Evelyn, you already tapped into this, right? You mentioned the need to actually go down to Haiti, do the work, parler en créole avec moun yo pour nous vraiment comprendre mentalité yo, besoin yo. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that as a final takeaway for folks in Haiti?
No, ça a été ça seulement. Et puis m'apprécier point too of qui gens que nous, just thinking about how do we uphold Haiti, like to talk about her in a constructive way, pas seulement bagay qui négatif, because tout l'entrée avec moun qui poko, what I would argue poko fear in Haiti or hopeful for it just yet. We need to stop that. We need to keep upholding the Haiti that our ancestors continuously fought for and people that are still fighting for an Haiti Kunya. So how do we speak positively? How do we speak constructively about Haiti too? Is the only other thing that I would add to that, but yeah.
Okay, great. And so to bring it back, right, to the Haitian communities here, we have a couple questions around how we can help support moun Haitien qui fait criver, right, dans diaspora, qui peut qu'on fin pour un fil, même genre en pile nan nous nan famille nous get un point fil, right? Qui ça nous capable faire pour yo? Gen moun qui mentionné faut nous gen elected officials qui capable encadrer moun sa nan communauté. What would you like to add to that? I know Garry, this is near and dear to your heart in terms of community building. So maybe you can take that one first.
Yeah, I do think, and in Wyclef City also, that we need to have an organization that's basically a lobbying organization that's policy oriented. Interesting enough, we had that with the National Coalition for Haitian Refugees, but it lost funding, and we haven't been able to put something like that back together because we just need some sophisticated organizations doing works on different level. Parce que bagay lan c'est mais qui j'aime wel. Regardez où Italie, Irlande, Israël. C'est trois pays. Bon, un pays ça yo, Israël, c'est diaspora qui fondé, qui formé parce que par exemple une façon que tu as un état juif dans l'état arabe ça yo. C'est parce que c'est force diaspora juif qui crée. En Irlande, OK? C'est un pays qui te plus pauvreté parce que de mon famille côté monde pas manger pas de pommes de terre pour yo.
Un pomme de terre.
Réfugiés sont au pays tout n'a fli. Le roi dans tout pays dans le monde toujours gagne riche. OK? Italie même, c'est ton mespité, parce que Italie, par Haïti est plus temps comme république que l'Italie. Mais avec diaspora italien, pays ça, yo là, yo viré, yo venu moderne, nation moderne. Moi, c'est que nous-mêmes, pour la génération par maintenant, ça ne peut pas faire un petit point d'APC faire pour nous traverser parce que nous avons souhaité petit moi OK ça c'est ma frère mais Harvard Yale whatever l'école CUNY OK donc pour y aller pour capable réellement travailler mais c'est nous-mêmes qui quitter structure pour capable venir OK parce que c'est pas rien il est difficile pour commencer pas commencer à zéro donc une organisation qui capable parler pour parler ici très important. Son challenge nous voyons là pour nous commencer à garder effectivement. Parce que j'ai pas fait en Haïti. C'est Washington décision au point et puis on dit mais ça pour nous faire sans que nous pas qu'un voix là-dedans. Donc si nous assez intelligent pour nous comprendre le système là, faut nous capable pour prendre next step là pour nous jouer dans le système là pour jouer un avantage pas nous, avantage pays nous. Parce que pas de monde qui veut aller acheter carte dominicaine, mais si vous avez un petit soleil, Haïti, pas difficile, tout le monde a fort paix. Depuis pour aller à Haïti, tout le monde a fort paix. Ça va le faire là, man. Non, pas comme ça. Donc, nous sommes capables de porter changement ça, mais il faut commencer là encore dans la communauté. Donc, c'est un bagage que nous avons besoin depuis longtemps et nous devons travailler sur lui. Bon, et son colonne, l'autre semaine,
That's next column, yeah. But you can't fault people though for not wanting to go when you hear all those kidnappings left and right. Même si, maybe si c'est un vol aller atterrir Cap Haïtien, mais it's a real fear, you know. So how would you address that, right? What do you do? I think Wyclef had said you can say Port-au-Prince is bad, but the rest of Haiti is beautiful. But how do you go from there, which is an easy enough thing to say, to actually go into Haiti knowing what might befall once you get there?
Is that for me?
That was for you, or I think Wyclef had brought it up. So maybe take that one step further.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The first thing I'd like to say is to Garry, Pierre-Pierre, m'bral di lan créole. Lè que Garry dit nous bral Washington, non saisi m'bral créole. Lè que Garry dit nous bral Washington, m'vle non vraiment comprendre ça veut dire. OK? Sou gade l'histoire, right? Parce que gen moun konne yo di ben Washington ça veut dire Washington bral contrôler bagay yo. L'autre ouais Martin Luther King à Washington. Là ouais que série de moun ouais à Washington, yo pas à Washington pour yo couper ba Washington. Non, c'est pas pour ça à Washington. Y a Washington pour yo di non vle non tande voix non. Moi vle non tande voix. Parce que moi gade non, moi ouais que gens que non bloqué Brooklyn Bridge. Les séries de ba a fait, vous comprenez? Mais moi aime la tout, les yo t'a dit haïtien pour sida non wèm sou MTV. Non bloqué Brooklyn Bridge, les non pas d'accord. Avec même énergie ça, faut qu'on fait Washington tando parce que si que ou pas dit OK kounya non vle Washington tande voix non. C'est pas 2 ou 3 moun qui a fait ça. C'est 2 ou 3 moun qui a commencé mouvement, mais c'est masse. So, c'est très important pour que nous comprenions exactement ce qu'on a dit. Deuxièmement, on a dit que c'est que en Haïti, si on veut aller à Haïti demain, c'est pas que pour que pour aller à Haïti, les fini yo pral kidnapper. Ça veut dire chaque monde qui t'a pral dans l'aéroport là, y a kidnappé yo. Ah non pas parler ba yo en réalité, it's so important. C'est que qu'on bral OK. So kounya ça veut dire les American Airlines land si gen 200 moun qui arrive en Haïti, y a prend at least 100 moun on l'autre 100. Non, ça veut dire que faut que nous conscients, mais en même temps, en anglais, nous allons écrire les common sense avec logic, right? So, nous gagnons au Cap, nous gagnons Port au Cap, vous comprenez? Vous avez Port-au-Prince, vous avez Jérémy. So, c'est que, non pas dit que l'insécurité n'est pas une réalité, pas de monde qui dit ça. Mais ça que m'a dit que, non pas qu'à peur pour nous aller en Haïti dans le pays, non. OK? Parce que nous gagnons exemple là. Non, ouais, exemple là. Nous avons une famille non, qui en Haïti, nous avons moun qui sous Zoom nan qui en Haïti. So, c'est très important que nous prudents, nous pas dit pas prudents, même les anges qui connaissent les anges, right? Si l'on a brûlé, ils sont anges, ils ont une puissance, ils pas entrer dans le cas, dans son anges liés. Mais, en attendant, non clair. So, m'pa dit non pour n'aller dans une situation of danger, mais non pas qu'à peur aller dans le pays. Non. Si Jamaïcain pas peur pour aller dans le pays, Africain pas peur pour aller dans Nigeria, non pas qu'à peur pour aller dans le pays. Jamais.
These are all fair points. And I love the challenges that you're throwing out there. You know, we need to form a PAC or a lobbying organization. Love that. Someone in the chat posted, how can we partner or connect entrepreneurs in Haiti with others abroad? Does that exist or on any platform? I think that sounds like a tech opportunity for the techies out there. So I'm really just loving these. There's one last question I'd like to get to before we wrap. And thank you all so much for staying extra. And that question is, you know, the idea of involving or making it possible for Haitians in the diaspora to vote in elections in Haiti. This is something that's come up that we've covered in the Haitian Times because apparently we can vote in Haiti's elections. And we have the embassies and consulates, they're setting up ways for us to be able to vote on the referendum in June and then in the elections later on. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, as would our questioner, Susie Ziegler. Who would like to take that one? What are your thoughts and feelings about participating electorally in Haiti's elections? Garry, you can be last because we know your thoughts on this from your column. But Dave and Nadine, how do you feel being on the ground? What are some things people are saying about this, considering the view, the perception of the diaspora as sort of arrogant?
Well, the first part of the question that I'd like to address is the fact that a lot of Haitians or Haitians in the diaspora, or folks who are born with Haitian parents, they don't realize that with the amended constitution that was amended in 2011, right? They actually have the right to claim their Haitian passport and their national ID card and to come to Haiti and vote in elections. A lot of folks aren't aware of that. Per the Haitian Constitution, the amended version in 2011, if you're born of a Haitian mother or a Haitian parent, or a Haitian mother or a Haitian father, you have the right to the Haitian citizenship, right? So a lot of folks don't know that. So I worked at the Haitian embassy in DC for a couple of years, and it was always a pleasure for me to inform folks of Haitian descent visiting the embassy, to let them know that and to help them go through the process of getting their Haitian passport. So I think that's one element that not enough folks know about in the diaspora. And hopefully, eventually, we'll have a situation where they don't just have to come to Haiti to vote, but they'll be able to do that in the embassies and consulates, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, do you think it's a good idea?
If I may add,
Go ahead. No, Nadine, you go.
Yeah, if I may add, I think one of the things that is so important about social change and a lot of the movement building we've been talking about on this call is addressing the root issue. The root issue is not necessarily the mechanism to be able to voice your opinion and place your vote. But for us, at least, if I'm thinking about the work we've done in education and to really equip another generation of citizen leaders, is what does civic engagement mean? What are my rights and my responsibilities? When I am placing my ballot for magistrat, kazek, azek, what are their different responsibilities? So that I'm not just listening to empty promises, but I actually know who I'm voting for, what their responsibilities are. And so for me, if we're really digging deep into the core issue here, a lot of it is not only those who've been pushing and advocating for their rights to vote, but what will we do with the vote? And for me, that equates the importance of civic education. And I think that goes across the board, whether you're born, still raised, living in Haiti or in the diaspora. I think there is a lack of civic engagement that it needs to become a priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I second that for sure. All right, let's go around and get some thoughts on participating in elections in Haiti and having like that political bridge take place, you know, for or against, if it's that black and white for you all. Let's go to Dave, right? Do you have a stance on this since you worked in the embassy? Have you seen it work? Like, give us some insights into how it's supposed to work, maybe.
In terms of upcoming elections?
In terms of the diaspora participating and
Mhm.
having a say in governance in Haiti.
Yeah. Well, as I've mentioned, per the amended constitution, members of the diaspora have that right, right? So it's a matter of informing them and helping them go through a process of really securing, what's theirs, right? And we don't have the exact numbers. Some folks estimate as many as 4 million Haitians living outside of Haiti, which would represent over 25% of Haitians, globally, right? So that's a huge percentage of Haitians living outside of Haiti. And as Wyclef and others have mentioned, when you have, I think it's actually around $3 billion going into Haiti, in remittances every year, you have an extremely large contribution that you bring into the country, and it's about, I think, about a third of Haiti's GDP is coming in from
That's right.
from the diaspora. So we have the economic contribution. So you should also make sure that you leverage your right as a Haitian to influence the country's elections and politics.
Well said. Any other thoughts on this before we wrap? Maybe from Wyclef, since we know your history with running for the presidency and all of that. What are your thoughts on participation?
First thing I would like to conclude by saying is the idea of Haitians here being able to go home and vote. I fully understand you, my brother, but it's not informative. And what I'm looking for is maybe there's a little tech genius that's here, that's listening to this, that can create our own version of political, right? So of course we would love to engage, but 9 times out of 10, we're watching CNN, Fox News. My wife will kill me if I said Fox News, so I might not say that. MSNBC, right? BBC. And when we listen to Haitian radio, we barely really follow it. If within the diaspora, right? We know what's going on with the Lakers game, but if there was an app that specifically can tell us who the mayors are, you know what I mean? What's their real background? Who's these senators? Like, what's their name? Do they have kids? Because what happens is it's almost like we would be going to engage in what I call a FENWA, right? Which means, yes, the amendment is made, but the part of it which I would like to see as we move towards the future within the Haitian embassies is how do we make it more tech savvy so we here have the information? Because I've been watching here within the Dominican structure, right? My Dominican friends, like when they're voting, they literally know who the people are. They'd be like, Clef, this person is this or that. 9 times out of 10, we have an idea of who the president's gonna be, but we don't have a full structure in education over here, you know what I mean, of what it's gonna be. So I would love to see somebody come up to your point with our version of political, right? I understand that we had an amendment, right? I might be closer to wanting to know the informations of the senators or the deputies, right? But at the end of the day, in order for Haitians here to have a real say-so, we will have to be, we need information. We don't have the information. It's like voting for the blind. The second thing I would say is definitely being a Haitian candidate and having ran for the presidency, I'm always within the idea of elections, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm always about a democratic process. And I feel like once somebody breaks that, it's a wrap. And usually what I've noticed with Haiti ever since, we was a kid, and starting with my uncle Raymond Joseph, you know what I'm saying? We all know Jivaye had to go, Baby Doc had to go, and all of that. But what happens is we get into a constant pattern where it's very important to let people finish whatever their term is, right? This is very debatable. So past the debate, I think it's very important that we stick to the democracy and the idea of fair elections, which is to me the most important thing. That's just my views. Thank you.
That was excellent. We actually run into this quite often at the Haitian Times when we're trying to figure out who these opposition leaders are. Like, we'll see news out of Haiti saying the opposition said no, the opposition said yes. And a basic question, right, from American style journalism is, who is like the face or the people who are involved in this opposition? And there's just no way to know. It's really mind blowing trying to get basic information out of Haiti. But this actually is a great way to just wrap up, unless you guys want to go around the room and do any closing remarks or takeaways for our audience. What I have for anyone who came late or who'll be watching this later on Zoom, I caught a few key things I want to make sure everyone gets to know from our conversation today, you know, how to foster unity and continue to build that unity. I have one, the diaspora. It's up to us to unify intellectually and economically. That could take the shape of a PAC or a lobbying organization that is there and able to go to Washington and represent our interests from a policy standpoint and an operational standpoint. So that's number one. Number two, I love Nadine made this point about decolonizing, you know, the mind, the structures that are making us as Haitians compare our realities and narratives with the imported versions of narratives and stories that are out there. So recognizing that we have unity, it's part of our DNA. We see it in everyday things like kombit, like sol and susus, or even giving somebody wulib when they need to get somewhere. And in the form of remittances, right? $2 billion from the diaspora in the US to Haiti is nothing to sneeze at. So recognizing that is a fair point, indeed, like going forward. There's a lot more Nadine said around sweat equity, which I'll applaud all day. We have to recognize people's contributions beyond the monetary value of what it is that they bring to the table. Third, right, this goes into having the right information, right? So having a conversation or dialogue. Garry made this point around how we engage with Haiti and understanding that we can't just go and bring our ideas and our solutions to people. We have to understand where they're coming from and be mindful of how they perceive us, so we can be sure that however we move forward is accurate, right? That it's to everyone's benefit and not a zero-sum game, I think he said. That point, I think, dovetails into the idea of having accurate, factual information on which to make decisions. And so I love that on WhatsApp, we all have it, we hear things happening, and the things that we hear are just completely false or misconstrued to, you know, support different agendas. So making sure there's a mechanism for us to get accurate information to make decisions is really important. And a lot of challenges came out of how we're going to be able to do that. Last but not least, I heard very importantly from several of you is, you know, we have to hold on to hope. Si diaspora ici découragé, moun en Haiti ap découragé, then gen le pays ap tout tombe plat net, right? That's what I hear. So however we can hold on to hope and represent Haiti in its entirety, not just by saying, you know, gen kidnapping, gen crime, insécurité, you know, à travers pays an, mais peut-être commencer penser de comment nous capables parler des pays an nan en façon qui continue montrer tout le monde comment, qui ça qui fait Haïti en Haïti as the first Black Republic. So those are my main takeaways from today. I think it sounds like the resources we'll send out to folks. We'll have lots of books and TED Talks for you. We'll have some websites and ways that you can get involved. If you would like to see what's happening in the tech sector, in the information sector, in the nonprofit world, or in Nadine and Dave's world, which is not charity, but nation building, I just really love that. So please look for our email in the coming days with those resources. And last but not least, obviously continue to follow our panelists on their socials. Join us on the HaitianTimes.com, Facebook pages, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and please continue to engage with us. With that said, I'd like to give everyone just another minute to quickly go around the room and leave any final thoughts for our audience. And Wyclef, you want to get your guitar ready to maybe leave us the way you started out? I would love that. So we'll start with Dave, go to Nadine, go to Yveline, and then Garry and Wyclef, you can take it away for us. Any final words, Dave, about unity in the community and how we can, keep that forward and make sure we foster it for another 217, 218 years?
Yeah. Bon, je remercie nous toutes qui étaient sur le panel là et je remercie nous pour l'invitation. Et je souhaite tout le monde qui a nous là une bonne fête de drapeau. Et je demande tout le monde pour songer l'histoire, nous songer pour une sortie. Et l'on songer et tout ça que les ancêtres nous ont fait et pour nous gagner liberté, nous, pour nous gagner indépendance. Nous aujourd'hui et nous apprécier et liberté ça que nous et donc à conscientiser nous pour rapprocher nous une à l'autre, pour nous supporter une à l'autre, pour avancer ensemble, pour et tout Haïtien pays que Haïti que nous voulons vivre là-dedans.
Thank you, Dave. Nadine, any
Oui, encore
final
une fois.
thoughts for us?
Yes, je remercie tout le monde. Je pense que nous avons un slogan dans ces pour Haïti qui dit problème yo en pile, mais solution yo possible. Donc, si vous parlez avec un monde, l'autre haïtien surtout, vous parlez pendant 5 minutes, essayez pour pendant 4 minutes, vous focus sur solution yo. And then the second point I wanted to mention is that there's a lot of myths and narratives that have harmed us psychologically and emotionally. So the trauma is real. And you can't heal if the wound is still open. So embrace the ways in which we can inform ourselves about trauma and heal from it collectively.
Excellent. I love that. Evelyn, what say you? Final thoughts on unity and how we move forward?
Final thoughts. Merci en pile. Et puis, déjà dit nous que ça, nous unifier, nous unifier in our history, puis nous unifier kounya, nous là, nous tendons nous même qui voyager à Haïti souvent, so nous là avec ou n'importe ça vous voulez, nous là pour vous.
Garry?
Well, I think Wyclef to a challenge at us, Macollvie. Because it is up to us to really.
Which one? I have like 3.
And so, yeah, I mean, we needed more information, but it's a challenge that, again, it has to come, we have to support each other in the process because we are going to be doing that work. We've been doing it in the community, and the next step is in Haiti itself. We are, planning for, because I think we could be better than political. We have better reporters. We have better editors. So we're up to the challenge and we're working on it. It's not we're not oblivious to that reality parce que nous connaissons la situation journaliste en Haïti parce que c'est difficile, pas de ressources et pour faire travailler l'argent avec là. Donc nous n'avons pas essayé de faire ça capable de côté par nous parce que ou pas qu'à faire rien sans information. C'est dans âge de l'information que nous vivons là et nous besoin de information qui est crédible. Parce que une bagaille que nous avons parlé tout à l'heure à nous-mêmes et bon, merci avec une audience engagement directeur nous qui toujours fait nous connaître ça trop négatif. Donc il fait nous penser la nouvelle a venir nous sur Haïti bouler est-ce que nécessaire? Est-ce que ça est nécessaire? Oui, parfois c'est nécessaire, mais est-ce que tout et ça me les pornographiques et violence ça est-ce que nous besoin bailler mon toute bagarre faut nous bailler mon en réalité mais en même temps si chaque jour c'est caoutchouc boulé n'a montré mon donc il pas nous désengager mon au lieu que d'engager. Thank you.
Thank you, Garry. I think you have columns for the next 3 weeks, so I'll be looking for those. Wyclef, any final thoughts? And please help us.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was an honor. Moi, très content. Moi, très excité. Les gars et Pierre-Pierre te dit ça. Moi, là, parce que l'important pour me parler avec la communauté. So, je vais quitter avec deux nouvelles qui excitent ma pile. Une, c'est que Netflix décidé qu'il va faire un film Wyclef là. So, le film que nous choisi, c'est que nous dit à l'âge de from 1 to 10. Parce que pour moi, l'histoire qui est plus importante, c'est l'histoire la serre, l'histoire quoi des bouquets. Comment que avant on était gen manger, vous comprenez? Comment vous vivre. So idée ça c'est moi inspiré par imagination. Qui veut dire que vous rêve ou qu'a fait un rêve vient en réalité. Pour moi, moi excité parce que l'aime te venu aux États-Unis, je te fait m'a regarder Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, Little Red Riding Hood. Vous comprenez? So qu'on y en a bien version panon qui est le Prince of Port-au-Prince. Moi dit que Netflix faut que vous mettez ça nous les social responsibility. Social responsibility hein, c'est que faut que nous fassions que yo nous gain série d'emplois en Haïti. So basé sur film ça, nous allons mener Netflix en Haïti. Notre excité de ça. Deuxième nouvelle pour nous, moi excité parce que pas seulement m'a fait toute musique, nous allons gagner à ce qu'on a bien tout bas, c'est haïtien, nous allons prendre tout net. Deuxième bail m'a dit non, c'est que Showtime, il y a un gros show dans Showtime qui est un hit show qui est le de Chat. Chat, c'est sous Chicago. So, 4e saison, c'est moi-même qui a fait musique pour Chat. So, tout le monde qui va tourner sur Showtime, nous met checker ça. À la fin, moi excité parce que ça n'est pas que pour beat, non, c'est Wyclef comme un composer. So, ça, c'est l'autre direction, moi, j'étais excité. Quand il y a tout le monde qui aime musique Wyclef, ma banne un petit mélange. Quelques plaques, moi, j'ai écrit, vous comprenez? On l'est, Garry, madame te chita la caille, moi. Shakira te bon mon col, moi te dit Shakira. Hey girl, I can see your body moving and it's driving me crazy. And I didn't have the slightest idea until I saw you dancing. And when you walk up on the dance floor, nobody can ignore the way you move your body, girl. And everything's so unexpected, the way you right and left it. So you could keep on shaking. I never really knew that she could dance like this. She make a man wanna speak Spanish. Como se llama? Bonita. Shakira, Shakira. Oh, clever you talk like that. You make a woman go mad. So keep on rocking to the sound of the rumba. Originala, 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 me originala, originala, original. Flag Day, here we go.
Awesome.
We're probably getting Kentucky Fried Chicken. We're probably 6-piece nugget. Yo, for my Haitian, yo. For my Haitian. Non connaît non c'est le numéro 1. Ou qui veut nous si yo mettez non dans c'est. Jalousie a fait que couton yo c'est cahier. Flag Day, let's go, let's go. Oui, oui, oui.
Thank you so much, Wyclef. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bonne fête de la fête pour tout le monde. Et n'a pas sur Internet, Haitian Times, sur toutes socials yo. Essayez de rester engagé avec nous. Bon après-midi. Bye bye.
It was a pleasure. Merci.
And when they call me to the Grammys, I wrap the flag all around me. Cause I'm in love with Lady Haiti. I'm so in love they call me crazy. I left the music with the Haiti. Even though they try to stop me, I seen the earth shake right under her feet. She told me, baby, don't weep. I'm sitting on Oprah, tears in my eyes. I knew your story ever since a kid. Developed a crush when I heard what you did. 1804, you made my people free. You the reason I feel I could be anything. She in the white shirt, under the hot sun. Hey. Love when she talking that Creole. Hey. Got they on belle femme. I'm in love with Lady Haiti. And when they call me to the Grammys, I wrap the flag all around.